Is everyone in?
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you. Welcome to this evening's Neighbourhood Plan Steering Group meeting. These meetings are now on Zoom, but the meetings are recorded. And before we kick off with our agenda for this evening, we will allow a maximum of 15 minutes to receive questions from registered electors in the town. When providing your name and address, please confirm otherwise that you consent to your personal details being recorded in the minutes. Your personal details will be processed as directed by GDPR Article 5. So I don't know if there are any questions for myself or members of the steering group. If so, please feel free to introduce yourself and we can go through them. Okay, we'll just give it a few minutes because I know sometimes it's difficult to work the buttons on Zoom meeting.
All the guests are muted, but I haven't got any videos for them either.
That's fine.
Is that the same for everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
Some of them, Jeff, some of them did come on with video at the beginning,
Yeah, sure.
but they switched their videos off.
Okay.
I think that's how we're doing it with
Video off.
videos and microphones off. But obviously, if any of them would like to ask a question, this is time to put their video back on. And
Okay.
We'll just give it a few minutes. If not, then we will get started. Okay. So, Adrian, can you, if I try to share my screen, it says host disabled attendee screen sharing. So if you could modify that, please. I can share the agenda for this evening. Okay, super. Thank you. Okay, can everyone see the agenda in front of them?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, super. Thank you. So, agenda for this evening, apologies for absence. Adrian?
apologies received from councillors Barker and Hook.
Okay, thank you. So just to run very briefly through the agenda, obviously our first action is to approve the minutes from the 19th of October that we will do in a second. As per usual, we'll have a discussion on issues arising from the minutes. I think there are a number of actions we just need to have a look through. Update and surveys, that was to be provided by Chris, who's obviously can't make it this evening. He did, however, send me an email update, so I can provide that update on surveys. Update and policy drafting, we can do certainly. Identification of neighbourhood plan sites and site-specific policies for local plan sites. So I'm hoping we'll have a reasonable discussion around that. Obviously, things are moving afoot. We have the allocations from Swale, so we can move ahead in terms of what we want to do with those particular sites. And last but not least, we have designation of local green spaces. And as you're aware, the Swale Borough Council will be designating local green spaces within their local plan. So I'd like to have a discussion about that, and then maybe discuss how we can work that in with the neighbourhood plan as well. So I'm just going to stop sharing and then I'll reshare with the minutes of the last meeting. Hopefully you can see that. I have just highlighted the action points that we can talk through very briefly. So last time we had a discussion around the ongoing saga of engagement with the chair and vice chair of the local plan panel. I did have an action, which I haven't done. I was going to do it today, and then I thought, well, no, let's talk about it. So one of the actions was for me to write to the chair and vice chair of local plan panel, reiterating our desire for cooperation. Now, given that we continue to work with Swale Borough Council planning officers, I felt at this stage there didn't seem to be a lot of point in doing that. I'm still more than happy to do that, but I think we're getting the information that we require currently from the officers. And I know certainly a couple of us had a meeting Friday past with the officers, which I'll update you on in due course. But we're continuing to get actually really good service from the planning department as well. So very much thank them for their work and cooperation.
I would agree strongly with that, John. It seems to me that we've got a good working relationship with those officers, and the last thing we need to do is to sour it from above.
Yes,
I agree with that, John, as well. I'd second that.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff and Harold. And you know that I think that's the experience, and I know that we actually mentioned that to the officers when we had our meeting. You know, it's important that we differentiate between the officers who are working hard on the local plan and separate that from any maybe differences that we have with elected representatives, which is a very different matter. But we very much thank them for it. One of the actions was around exhibition feedback and survey meeting to be arranged with Urban Vision. So we did have a meeting with Urban Vision just this week. The purpose of that was really simple. It was simply to pass on the exhibition feedback. So essentially Urban Vision, as you know, now have the policy areas, the titles, and some ideas around policy areas. We have provided all the feedback from the exhibitions that has been circulated. It's significant, and I'd like to thank Adrian for doing it. Every single post-it note that was written on a wall was written up. Adrian, has that feedback now gone on the website as well?
It hasn't, because the town council's in the process of moving over, so I think we're at the point where we're holding off until we get the new website.
Okay, super. That's completely understandable.
Yeah.
I think once we can,
Yeah, once we can, it will go on.
it will go up there. So essentially,
And the same is the same for the second exhibition, which is not online yet either, for the same reason.
right. Okay.
I'm waiting for the condition. Yeah.
Okay, super. Thank you. So we've got feedback from Exhibition 1, feedback from Exhibition 2, and then we have one document which is consolidated feedback from both exhibitions around the policy areas. There was a survey meeting, Urban Vision. I didn't attend it. I understand Chris and Adrian, you had that meeting?
I haven't been at a meeting with Urban Vision about surveys, no.
Okay, so maybe that was just Chris, but I understand that that was simply to finalize the survey. Surveys are on topic for this agenda, so I'll talk more about that later. But I think that meeting did happen.
I think Jeff Wade wants to come in.
Sorry, Jeff.
Jeff, you're muted.
Jeff, you're still muted.
When we started off along the lines of broadening the engagement with as wide a part of the community as we could, I think we're reading through that feedback from the exhibitions, we really are starting to broaden that out. And I don't know about others who met with public who were attending the exhibitions, is that it is being appreciated that there is that opportunity for involvement in expressing an opinion. And I think we seem to be on course from what we started out with to where we're going to now. That was just my observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, just on that, Jeff, and it ties in with this action as well, which was around local plan members' involvement in the neighbourhood plan. I'm pleased to say, I think every councillor, town councillor, Swale Borough councillor participated in the exhibition, so invigilated for at least 1 or 2 sessions. So spent, you know, 2 to 4 hours actually at the exhibition. So I'm very encouraged with that. We did numbers for the first exhibition. We reckon we got over 400 through the door. we haven't actually totted up or made an estimate for the second exhibition yet. It was less well attended. I think there's probably a number of reasons for that. One, I don't think it was quite as engaging as the first exhibition, but you know, that it is what it is. I think also there is, of course, a chance that some people thought it was the same exhibition running again, but we certainly did get participation. I don't know if there's any feedback from any of you who were, well, you're all involved with it. Hannah?
The feedback that I got was kind of what you said, really. There were a few people that did think it was the same exhibition, 100%. But also the first exhibition had a kind of broader remit, so people were more engaged with that kind of bigger discussion than the smaller one that was for the second exhibition, I think.
Agreed. Yeah.
John, I think the thing that's worth adding to that is that the first one, of course, there was considerable potential controversy about the numbers. By the time we got to the second one, the worst fears over the numbers had diminished. And what is striking is the relatively high level of accord at the second exhibition. I mean, there was quite a lot of consensus at the first. By the time we got to the second, there was even more. And I think that's borne out by going through the comments, which Adrian has so carefully put into the spreadsheet.
Yeah, I agree, Harold. I think a lot of the comments were aligned. There was very little new in there, and I think it was very useful. Obviously, the big difference between the first and second exhibition was the element around design and housing design. Just in terms of that, obviously, we're working with ACOM to help us with the design code. Interestingly, we did have someone come into the meeting and asked about the involvement of ACOM in that exhibition. I think it's worth mentioning again, although we've mentioned it several times before. We are using ACOM. They've been appointed by locality to support us with design code, and it's not costing the council anything, essentially. So the cost of running that second exhibition were quite minimal. But that feedback's gone back to ACOM, and we will be arranging a follow-up meeting with ACOM on the design codes. And the last one, site-specific policy area meeting to be arranged in early November. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about site-specific policies as part of this meeting. Any other comments on the last minutes? Would anyone like to nominate that we accept the minutes?
I'll move them as a correct record.
Yes.
And Hannah, will you second? And if we can all just very briefly vote.
Yes.
Okay, minutes accepted. Right. If you bear with me a second, we will move back to the agenda. I can just get my screen to break. All right. Okay, just for ease of use, I'm not going to put up the agenda again, but I can tell you what it is. So the next agenda item was update on surveys. So just to remind you, we are doing 3 different surveys. We're doing a household survey, which, as the name suggests, goes to every single household in Faversham. We are doing a business survey, which will go to businesses in Faversham, including retailers, but obviously extending to anyone who owns or operates a business within Faversham. And then we are doing a youth survey. So we've got yet to decide how we run that youth survey, given that it's quite a hard to reach group. And we hope to get some advice on Dan Cochran, who's doing a lot of work with schools, about how we do that. But obviously the first one up is the resident survey. So to give you the update from Chris, the survey has been developed. It was developed with our communications agency. Breakthrough Communications have worked on it. The survey is to be posted out early next week. So essentially it's going to Royal Mail, who will deliver it to every household. There is a deadline for responses of the 9th of December. And the responses will be collated and presented to the Town Council around mid-January 2021. So essentially, it will come back in December. Breakthrough Communications will then spend 2 or 3 weeks, actually, obviously there's Christmas holiday in there, but 2 or 3 weeks analysing it, collating the data, and then presenting it back. And Chris tells me he will be working on business and youth surveys this week. So I guess we will see them in due course. Is there any questions on surveys or where we are with them? No. I think it's pretty straightforward. I think Chris circulated the survey. But obviously that feedback from that survey will get incorporated into the policies and policy areas as we looked at them. So there's no questions on that. I'll go to item 5, which is an update on policy drafting. So just to get everyone up to speed with this, our consultants that we're using to support the development plan, Urban Vision, as I mentioned at the start, they have identified policy areas and they have been given the exhibition feedback. So one of the things which is clear, the policy areas as identified by Urban Vision don't necessarily coincide with the policy descriptors as we use them in the exhibition. So I think what Urban Vision are going to be doing over the next fortnight is actually taking the outputs from the exhibition, taking their own thoughts and ideas around those areas, and they'll be developing a first draft. Okay, so it's very much a first draft. Once we have that first draft, a number of things will happen. We'll have a meeting first of all, we'll circulate it, give people time to digest it, have a look at it. We will then circulate that to the steering group, and then we will circulate that to the wider group who are involved. It'll also, we'll put it on the website as well and invite comment on the website. The other thing we need to do, of course, is then continue to incorporate feedback as we get it. So realistically, we will get the first draft at the end of November, say first week of December. We will then iterate it over about a month or so. So it will probably be around February before we'll have had an opportunity to incorporate the feedback and have a reasonable near final draft for consultation. I don't know if there's any comments or observations regarding where we are with the policies.
John, I think it is perhaps worth adding one thing that's come out of our discussions with the Swale officers, which is that in the end, it will be helpful to everyone, I think, if there's some congruence between the kind of language that we're using in the neighbourhood plan policies and what Swale is using at the local plan level. The more, that doesn't mean that we accept everything that they suggest, but we don't need to be having battles about terminology between us and Swale, because all we'll do is lose democratic engagement with the public in Faversham. So I think that's something that we'll need to work at over that month to 6 weeks when we're looking at what we're doing and talking with the officers at Swale.
Thanks, Harold. You're absolutely right. And just to provide some context to that, one of the items that is identified within the local plan panel discussions, obviously 4 sites have been allocated to take up to, was it 3, let me get this right, yeah, 3,300 houses. What part of that, in addition to that allocation, so this came out of our discussion on Friday that's important to get you up to speed with. Those sites were chosen for a number of reasons, which are described in detail in the minutes of the local plan panel. However, one of the key reasons those sites were chosen is that they are obviously in close proximity to one another. So you've got the site in southeast Faversham, commonly known as the Duchy of Cornwall development. You have the development in Preston Fields, which is actually a hangover from the previous local plan, but it has been reselected, as it were. You have the land east of Faversham, which is kind of east of Love Lane. And then you have a site on Graveney Road. So they were chosen in part because of their proximity and because they enable the development of a kind of a global strategy around transport and permeability. Now, Swell will be writing some policy on that. We haven't seen that policy. In fact, the policy hasn't been written yet, but we have been told that Swell will share that policy with us at the earliest possible time. And I think the earliest possible time is at the beginning of next month. So essentially, as you all know, the ambition of Swell is to have a draft policy by the end of the year, or sorry, a draft local plan by the end of the year. So we should see that policy in December. Was there any thoughts on that?
John, just to say that reinforces the point that Harold made earlier about they're really running on tight deadlines, and we want to be as supportive of that and appreciative of that as long as we're seeing that we're being listened to and we're being channeled into the process. And I think that's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think it's an interesting point, Jeff, because obviously I think we should, where it's all possible, and drive cooperation, drive alignment to make sure that we're pulling in the same direction. I don't think, however, that we are necessarily constrained by what Swell come up with. So I think the thing we've always got to bear in mind is we're here to serve the needs and requirements of people in Faversham, and I think so far it's been really positive, and we've been working in the same way. We haven't seen their policies yet, but we're under no obligation to agree 100% with them. But I do agree, Jeff, we should be trying to harmonise as much as possible. Hannah.
Thank you. I think it's also worth noting that the government planning paper that was potentially coming through quite soon might not actually be coming through at the same pace that originally it was intended that it might. So I think that's just worth noting for reference, because I think that takes some pressure off of the whole thing.
Yeah, I read that today with interest. I think there's rebellion in the Shires, isn't it? It's local.
Yes, but notably, John, absolutely no rebellion from Faversham over that.
No. I think that's a worthy point of note, Harold. And without wishing to get political, I think I know that 10 Kent MPs wrote to Robert Jenrick to push back on the proposal, and I know our own MP wasn't one of those signatories. But yeah, I think there has been a lack of pushback.
Well done to the other 10 anyway.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if there are no other questions or comments on policy drafting, we'll push on. But I think the key message is we'll get something by the end of the month, and then we can share and circulate. Right, perhaps certainly for me, I think one of the most interesting points we're getting at within the neighbourhood plan and our thinking around the neighbourhood plan. I'll kick us off, but I really like to get everyone's views on this. So as mentioned, we now have 4 large sites allocated by Swell for 3,300 houses. One of the mentions in the Swell local plan panel recommendations is that the neighbourhood plan may identify sites for up to 200 additional houses. Now, obviously, we can identify 0 houses in addition to the 3,300, or we could identify many, many more. So I think it's positive, because what it shows is that swell officers recognise that the neighbourhood plan's running. They recognise that the neighbourhood plan may wish to do it. So I think it's a real positive. There's a number of things that come out of that, though, and the first one is how we now interact with the owners, promoters of the 4 sites which have come forward. So I'll just give you a very, very quick update based on our discussion on Friday with the swell officers, and then I'll open it to the floor. So what we've done is we've identified 2 of the owners of those 4 sites. So there's 4 sites. 2 of the owners we don't know yet. And it's very simple. The reason we don't know that is very, very simple. Swell have to get permission from those owners and promoters to share their details with us. So I suppose it's a GDPR thing, but essentially they have to get permission to share them. So the 2 we have identified, one we knew already, which is the Duke of Cornwall, right? Owns one of the sites and working with the Duchy team. The second one, which was interesting, is the site east of Faversham is owned by Atwood. So I don't know whether it's owned by Atwood Farms or one of the Atwood companies, but essentially, for those, I wasn't familiar with this until Friday, and I've went and looked it up, but Kevin Atwood is a significant landowner in Kent. I think farms around 4,000 acres around Doddington, which is a huge farm, but actually but clearly owns that land east of Faversham. The promoter of that land is a group called Hume Planning, who have been working obviously with the landowner to put forward and promote that land for development. So what I'd like to do, and this is the thing for debate and really for your permission and agreement, is to contact those owners. Now, as you know, we have had one meeting with the Duchy months ago. I think it was back around March or April time. It was certainly around the time of the first lockdown. But now we know those sites are going ahead. From where I'm sitting, it would make sense for us to engage with those landowners. But I'll pass it over to you guys for thoughts.
John, I think we'd be doing a pretty poor job if we didn't at least try to open up discussions with them. I mean, everyone in this meeting and those watching will know that we have very long discussions with the Duchy a long time ago. Mm-hmm. And they ran some very useful workshops of inquiry by design, the results of which I think are still pretty largely current. But we did ought to be reopening discussions with them. And it seems crazy if we don't speak to the Atwoods and if we don't try to Kevin Atwood or his representatives. And it would also be crazy, I think, not to try to speak with the promoters of the other 2 sites. Although the Preston Fields one is probably less important in the sense that that's pretty much settled, I suspect.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to that with the grid of streets that could be possible? Preston Fields is quite an interesting part of the jigsaw puzzle, and it's been very contentious about the junction between that site and Ashford Road and roundabouts and so on, that really it would be very useful, I think, to engage with the developers at Preston Fields, so we can try and join up as far as we can some concept of a street grid, so that the whole thing comes together holistically rather than different pieces of a jigsaw puzzle being done on their own.
Yeah, I agree, Jeff. Hannah?
Yeah, I was going to completely agree with what Jeff said. I think that right from the beginning of discussions, we've said that we don't want to really treat individual building opportunities as kind of their own islands. I think everything has to work together, and it also has to incorporate the original town that's here and how that connects to new development as well. So a holistic approach to that is absolutely crucial, and I think that in that vein we have to go and start talking to the developers.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
perhaps worth adding to what Hannah just said, John, that clearly the swale planners are equally aware of that. They're as keen as we are that that should happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Jeff alluded to it, and looking through the notes of the local plan panel meeting, I am aware that I don't know what term they're using. Is it a relief road? I'm not quite sure, but the idea is that there is a road that runs from the Duchy site to straight onto the Ashford Road near the motorway junction. So they're therefore avoiding putting additional traffic, well, as much additional traffic onto the A2. So you're absolutely right, Jeff. I believe that's part of the Preston Fields development. Whether the developer has agreed to that, I'm not sure. But I think as soon as we can find out who we can work with on it, the better. My understanding is there was planning permission on that site, but it may need to be adapted to meet the needs of that road. Another thing that has been talked about, but I think we received some confirmation of it on Friday. So as you can see, it was a very useful discussion with the swell officers on Friday. On one of two sites, so either the Duchy of Cornwall site, which is SLA 18266, or east of Faversham 18/109, there will be a secondary school. So, I'd heard it talked about in terms of there might be, but I think there's pretty much confirmation that the town will be getting a new secondary school. My understanding is that negotiations are ongoing with that. So this is what we're being told by Swell. So I presume it's public domain stuff. Is it KCC are in negotiation with one or other or both of those landlords? They're trying to secure, my understanding is 10 hectares of land for a school. And I didn't know this, but I think the way it works these days is that the school is built using predominantly Section 106 money from the buildings from the other building sites. And then in terms of who will run that school, I believe it goes out to tender. So it could be a brand new academy. It could be an existing provider in the town, or we really, really don't know. But I think it's good news that there will be a secondary school. I think with that comes a lot of opportunities. One of the things that we have talked about a lot is how we increase sports provision. We provide more pitches, and specifically pitches for joint community use. And I think this does give us an opportunity. I don't know anything more about it at the moment, other than the negotiations are ongoing. But I think it's something we need to stay very close to.
John, can I add something more on the Duchy site? When we first got involved with them very early on, and there were public workshops, the Princess Foundation were involved very closely with community engagement.
Yeah.
And if there's any opportunity to consolidate what we're doing and to integrate and get support from the Princess Foundation in that, I think that would complement the design aspects that we're looking for. And some of the terminology, I think, like the likes of Jim Stoner, Chris Wright, have mentioned in emails in recent days. Yeah. We will be reflecting the spirit, I think, of that, and incorporating that into one approach, so that we're all pulling on the rope in the same direction, with as many resources supporting what our community wants as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, Jeff, and I think that's the topic of conversation with both the Duchy and Hume Planning, who are obviously working on behalf of Atwood. Absolutely, the bottom line is both, apart from the Preston Fields, that, like I say, may already have planning permission on it, waiting for confirmation from Swell on that. Those other sites don't have planning permission, and of course, assuming that that we can bring forward a neighbourhood plan prior to them applying for planning permission. The neighbourhood plan will apply as a planning tool for those sites. So I absolutely agree. I think the quicker and sooner we can work with them, tell them what we're doing, and ensure that any plans they bring forward or even they're thinking about are aligned to what we'd like to see. So absolutely agree. So can I then formally suggest that I propose then that we make contact with both the Duchy of Cornwall representatives and Hume Planning, who are representatives of Atwood. And I think the objective of doing that in the first instance is to make them aware of what we're doing, where we are in the process, and then really we just take it from there, but really just for, certainly with Human Planning, for an introductory call. So if I can propose that, would you, Hannah, you all agree to it?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So Adrian, the contact details have been supplied to me by one of the Swell officers, so I can push those on to you. And if we can write to them formally to request a meeting, that would be great. Right, so they're the big sites, and the sites which frankly aren't within our gift, sites that have been allocated by Swell, but we'll certainly work with them. The other important element, and in a sense, an equally important element, is what we do around site inclusion within the neighbourhood plan. So we can obviously identify additional sites that sit without those sites. So let me just share a couple of thoughts of mine, and then again, I'll open it up. I think all of us recognise that within the town, there are small sites. And by small sites, I mean sites of, sites that may take 5 houses, 10 houses, 15, 20, up to around 50 houses that may be suitable for development. Now, some of those may already have come forward in the existing SLA, so I think we need to take a look at it. But in principle, I think there are within the town a number of sites within the existing settlement boundary. And by that, I mean Faversham as it is today, not as it will be in the future. Obviously, all the new sites that have been allocated by Swell are adjacent to the town, so they result in expansion of the town. But I think it would be a missed opportunity for us to not attempt to identify sites within the town, predominantly brownfield. There may be other sites which aren't brownfield, but are, for whatever reason, of low amenity value, may be appropriate or suitable. And we also recognise, I think, that there is the Community Land Trust who are interested in developing homes. There is a huge demand for affordable homes. Now, obviously, affordable homes, using the government's definition, will come through on the big sites. But again, I think there's an opportunity for us to identify sites for small builders, self-builders, community builders. So I would like us to see us identifying additional sites within the town. I don't know if anyone else has any comments or thoughts on that. Hannah.
Yeah, just one comment. I had an interesting conversation with a gent that came to the second exhibition around the designation of greenfield and brownfield sites and the importance of looking at biodiversity loss in terms of brownfield sites, which can often be quite rich in terms of biodiversity in comparison to a greenfield site which might not. So I just thought that was an interesting topic to include when we look at further allocations, just in terms of our commitment to biodiversity conservation as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Hannah, and it's something I've only become aware of really recently, probably with advice and intervention with people like Councillor Williams, and I know Matthew Hatchwell, who's been a huge supporter of the neighbourhood plan. That actually a lot of the farmed fields around here have got lower biodiversity than people's gardens. So I absolutely agree. I think it's a really, really valid point. I think currently we don't have to decide what the selection criteria are. Obviously we will, but point well taken. I think brownfield sites can be just as useful as greenfield sites in terms of biodiversity. Any other comments?
Well, perhaps only to support what Hannah just said, in the sense that if we are going to look at the engine shed, the carriage shed, and the turntable site, that has been almost untouched by human beings for quite a long period of time now. The biodiversity there will be very interesting. And it's very important that that site is seen both as a potential community resource, a cultural heritage site, and I think a wildlife or a biodiversity site. Rather, in a way, quite similar to the Orr Gunpowder Works Country Park, or that won't be a country park.
And
Yeah,
John,
I really strongly agree with that, Harold.
yeah. If I can add, when we had the initial workshops with the Duchy, when they were outlining what they were proposing to do, they highlighted that they're being able to make their sites more biodiverse because the agricultural land in some cases is not as diverse as the provisions that they're putting in within new developments. And I think we need to champion that theme as much as we can so that we can bring biodiversity into the town.
Yeah, no, agreed. So Harold, you mentioned the engine shed and carriage shed as a potential heritage site. Now, I'm also aware that so please correct me if I'm wrong in this. I don't think it's a Faversham Society initiative, but I know the Faversham Society have been interested in looking at the ownership of around TS Hazard and so on as well.
Yeah, I mean, we for some time, John, the Society's been aware that we've got some important heritage buildings. Hazard is particularly important, but so are the railway buildings between the two railway lines, which have been substantially neglected from a heritage point of view. I mean, Hazard's been in use, will continue to be in use, I suspect, for a while for the Sea Cadets, and they're looking for a new home. But potentially Hazard could regenerate that quarter of the town. So the Society is certainly interested in looking with others at the possibility of getting the ownership of Hazard back into the town in some kind of trust, I would guess, in the same way that the Stonebridge Pond is one example of that. I don't think the Faversham Society could do it on its own. It needs to do it with others. It's a big project and it needs to raise a lot of money to do the necessary work to ensure the conservation of the building and to find an alternative use. There have been discussions about alternative uses. We know the Lord Warden at one point was quite interested in the possibility of it becoming a northern gateway for the Cinque Ports, which would enable us to connect to the National Maritime Museum, with whom we've had some connections recently over pollards. And also because, and the reason gateway I think is an appropriate word to use in relation to this, is that obviously we need to bear in mind that we're asking Swale to give us it back. So there needs to be something in it for Swale, and one of the things that's potentially in it for Swale is a greater use of the Swale for maritime tourism, and that connects nicely with Sheppey as well as Sittingbourne. It actually brings the three parts of the borough. It's not so good for the Downs, but it's pretty good for the rest of the borough. And we do need to think about what we're doing in relation to the borough as a whole, and not just Faversham, which is why this notion of a gateway heritage area has come up. Still clumsy language, but that's the kind of thinking that lies behind that one. On the railway, I think that the stars are well aligned at the moment for a possible engagement with Swale and with Network Rail over that particular area of heritage. Network Rail are apparently very aware of their responsibilities with Grade 2 listed buildings. It seems that there's a degree of at least sympathy, I wouldn't go further than that, but a degree of sympathy within Network Rail for something to be done. We have 2 more years of the current administration, and they seem to be very keen. We saw one of their first policies they came out with was the heritage policy. So I think, you know, we've got I think we've got 2 years to really make some progress on this, and we may have longer, but we may not. And it seems to me that we should be attempting to crack on with this, and we need to think through what the implications are for the plan as a whole. These two areas are opened up. Just finally, John, so I've talked for a long time, I realise, but the heritage quarter at around Hazard could be very helpful in opening up the regeneration possibilities that we've talked about for a long time around the creek. And the railway one is interesting to me because it would access to it would always be from Love Lane, because it wouldn't be possible to access it from anywhere else, and that brings in some interesting community opportunities. Potentially there could be some community spaces in that development in heritage buildings, which it would be for a community which at the moment is quite a long way out of town and has very few community buildings.
Yeah, I absolutely, you know, concur with that, Harold. It's something that certainly within some of the groups within town council we talk about a lot, is that there's a complete lack of provision in the east of the town currently for youth, for instance, and clearly that's a situation that can only get worse with more housing to the east of the town. So absolutely agree. It could be a really interesting project. You know, why build a new youth club when, you know, Section 106 money from developments could help refurbish an existing building to use as one. I think it's a great idea.
So just to be clear, John, the Faversham Society is merely beginning to convene some meetings to discuss it. We're not trying to take it over or run it or anything else. We just want to try and get something to start to move.
Yeah. Just in terms of the creek itself, now, one of the things I think we're all very aware of is that the neighbourhood plan will, you know, assuming it comes into force, will overwrite essentially the existing creek neighbourhood plan. There are obviously a number of sites, let's call them areas rather than sites, because sites is very much focused on ownership and who owns what where. But obviously there's the upper basin, if that's the correct term for it, which is underused, underdeveloped. In fact, at the minute is largely, at least 50% of it, to my mind, is silted up. And there is obviously land around there. Obviously, controversially, Ordnance Wharf, I understand, they've withdrawn the application, I think, which is good news and something we welcome. But certainly that area of land and the land to the north of it, i.e. the BMM Weston site and BMM Weston car park, did come forward in the SLA. So that is land which obviously has the potential for mixed use development. So again, that's an area, you know, that we should look at in the entirety of the creek and basin, assuming we get the bridge, of course.
John, it was interesting when we put a number of unsuccessful applications in for grants to develop that, and we called it the Faversham Basin to imply the spirit of a destination at the top of the creek, at the head of the creek, so that people could relate to it. Very similar to what you get on the national canals. In the Midlands, there are a lot of basins, and to have the Faversham Basin, and I know with the work that David Melville is doing, there must be an opinion there of how we can integrate all this thing together holistically. I know it still seems a bit of a red herring, and I'm inclined to agree with it because of the cost of running it, but lots of people talk about the Graveney boat coming back. But that's going to be a pile of wood unless it has an environmentally controlled environment. So we've got to keep our feet on the ground with some of these things. Mm-hmm. But there's great opportunities. What we've discussed tonight is starting to bring together what I've been discussing for 3 or 4 years. And really, it's really encouraging that we're on the same journey now.
Yeah.
And it's making sure that we've got continuity of that through to the end.
Yeah, I agree, Jeff. And one of the things I'm very aware of is that, and it was interesting, actually, it was a big learning for me through the exhibition process, and is that there are lots of things in the town which have been going on for some time, and lots of people really engaged with them. I suppose it's, for me, it was understanding the role of the neighbourhood plan in facilitating that, but equally understanding the limitations of the neighbourhood plan in delivering that. So of course, you know, let's be frank, and let's understand what we've got here. The neighbourhood plan will be a planning tool. We can design it in such a way that it enables people to bring forward their ideas, but it won't fund the ideas. So in other words, we can't make the Faversham Basin come to life, but I think what we can certainly do, and what I'd hope we can do, is develop policies that enable others to develop it in a way which is appropriate and suitable and meets the needs of people. I also think it's really interesting, Jeff, because we've got two areas, one of which I now understand is Faversham Basin, and then I think the other one is the Cinque Ports Gateway. And it sounds like they are two quite interesting, catchy working titles for those two particular areas.
I had a conversation with Lord Boyce about must be 4 years ago now, when we had the 150th anniversary of the almshouses. And he was quite enthusiastic about that concept of the northern gateway to the Cinque Ports when we discussed it. And I know Harold and I have had conversations about it in the past as well. So it all seems to be coming together.
I do hope so, Jeff. I do hope so. So just a thought on that. I think, and this ties in what you were saying earlier, Jeff. I think we are reaching a stage of momentum. I think it's, you know, let's be honest, it's taken us quite a few months to get to the stage where things are starting to roll. But I think that they're starting to snowball and move quite quickly. We don't have to decide on it, the detail this evening, but it's becoming increasingly clear to me that there are a number of, we meet as a steering group, but there are a number of work streams which in themselves are becoming reasonably sized mini projects. So one of them being, you know, Faversham Basin and the Cinque Ports Gateway type area. I think, you know, issues around pitches, sports facilities and so on is another one. So I think what would be useful for us to think about, maybe for next meeting, and we can hold it for our next agenda, is to actually identify whether we need to maybe think about how we structure and have some parallel tracks running to get this over a line. Because I agree, there's a lot of energy building, there's a lot of momentum building, Jeff, and I think it really feels like we could make things happen relatively quickly if we get our resources aligned.
John, could I just add one thing to that? So I agree with all you've said. I think what we also need to remind ourselves is that this is a plan for the next 15 years. I mean, given the economic situation and COVID, none of this is actually going to happen on the ground quickly. But what we need to try and do is create a planning environment where these things, as you said, can be, that it can facilitate these things happening when there is more money around, because clearly money is going to be very tight for the next few years.
Yeah. No, I agreed, Harold. In fact, I think we can determine the length of time it runs, so we can make it run for 20 years if we so wish.
But we also, John, need to recognise that somebody else could come along and say, well, we're going to tear that up and we'll have a new one. So we need to make sure that there's good public support for what we do. I mean, that's a critical part of it, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just in terms of sites, you know, I think this is an important point. Is the Swale site allocation is based upon sites which are available and deliverable, i.e. someone's come forward, say, I've got a site, it's ready to rock, let's develop it. A neighbourhood plan is different because we can identify sites that may become available in 10 years' time and earmark them and say, if that site ever becomes available, it should be used for X, Y, or Z. I think that's a really important thing to think about, Harold. And I know one of the conversations we had very early in this process is how do we protect important assets for the town, like the post office,
and the police station,
and the police station, and sites like that. We could offer some thoughts and on them, even though they're not currently available sites. and I think it's something we should do. Are there any other points on sites and site selection? If not, I've got a recommendation that I'd like to get your agreement on. In order to bring these things forward, like sites around the Faversham Basin, like around the Gateway, like the site, the railway site, is we need to do a call for sites. Now, the call for sites doesn't have to be big or exotic. Essentially, what we need to do is just make the community aware that they can nominate sites which they think are useful, interesting, and could be potential sites in the future. Not just housing sites, but sites for other uses as well. So we could do a call for sites. I don't know what anyone thinks about that.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say something else, John. I think it's a really good idea. Wouldn't we be mad not to?
Yeah.
There's no other formal way of opening discussions or finding out what might come forward on a much smaller scale.
Yeah, true. Hannah?
I think that's a really good idea. It's something that we've done a little bit of in the Climate and Biodiversity Committee, and kind of reaching out to nominate areas for kind of rewilding projects or tree planting as well. So it works quite well in correlation with that as well, that piece of work that's been done by another committee.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. And I think it's also relevant for our next discussion, which is around local green spaces. But yeah, so do we have agreement? Can I ask you to show your agreement if you agree that we should consider running a call for sites? How soon we can do it, I'm not sure. I'll need to look into it, but certainly in principle. Adrian, if we take that forward as a recommendation for Town Council.
Could we add to that, John, that the steering group feels it should be done as soon as humanly possible?
Yes, absolutely. Any other comments on sites and site-specific policies before we move on? Cool. Okay, so the last formal agenda item is designation of local green spaces. So just to kick us off on this and our discussion on it. So local green spaces can be designated in two circumstances. They can be designated at the point that local plans are rewritten, or they can be designated within neighbourhood plans. So they're the two areas or two opportunities for local green space designation. Swale already have a number, and it's a really high number. I think for the whole of Swale, they've had 118 nominations for local green spaces. I haven't counted how many are in Faversham, but there are a significant number. Now, the selection of those sites is a matter for Swale. We can certainly encourage them to adopt sites, but Swale will designate those sites. Just in terms of how that process is working, I've checked with Ben J. Martin, who very kindly updated me on it. So essentially, Swale have asked the ward councillors to review existing sites and review new sites which have been submitted within their wards. And I think the idea then is that the borough councillors, and Hannah, you can confirm this or otherwise, the borough councillors then feed back into the discussion. The short list of sites for inclusion will be presented to Swale Cabinet on the 16th of December. So essentially, it's happening now, and it's going to be happening over the forthcoming weeks. What's quite interesting is Swale haven't actually consulted on the sites yet. Their intention is once they have the short list, they will then consult with landowners. And then, of course, there's the Regulation 19 public consultation. And obviously the public will be able to comment on those sites at that point. So yeah, that's where we are with local green space designation from Swale. Hannah, have you any comments as a Swale councillor on it?
No, what you've said is exactly right. Thank you.
So I know that a number of those nominations that are out there, that some of the wider neighbourhood planning group are familiar with, not least Matthew Hatchwell, who I've mentioned before. And I know that Matthew will be talking with Swell councillors on those sites, and really just, I suppose, given the case of why they've been nominated. So we will watch that with interest. What's the relevance of that to the neighbourhood plan? Relevance, of course, is that if sites aren't designated within the local plan, we have an opportunity to designate within the neighbourhood plan, and it would make sense for us to do a call for sites as well. Obviously not yet, because the local plan process is in train, but certainly come January, I think there's an opportunity for us to do a call for sites for local green spaces as well. Is there any comments on local green spaces? Hannah?
Yeah, maybe just a tiny one. Just going back to what I'd already discussed about biodiversity, I think it's really important to communicate that with the public, that it's not just like a space that it's green, it's a space that could contribute towards biodiversity net gain as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been educating myself on local green spaces, and admittedly it was something I didn't understand a lot about a few weeks ago. But for instance, one of the things that I thought was that a local green space has to be a space that is publicly accessible. So, you know, I have a dog and I walk my dog, so I'm familiar with local green spaces. But actually there can be spaces which aren't publicly accessible, but are important to the community for a variety of reasons. And that can be because they're naturally beautiful. It's because they host particular animals or plant species which are under threat or rare. So there's a host of reasons why local green spaces can be local green spaces. We'll obviously go into that in a lot more detail when we do our call for sites. And I think, let me check. Yeah, I think Councillor Williams is on this evening, and of course would very much invite and encourage and expect Councillor Williams and the group that you're involved with, Hannah, as well, to participate in that. Okay, so let's look. Any other comments on local green spaces? No. Right, so that concludes, I think, our agenda for this evening. Any other business wasn't on there, and we don't normally have it, but there's a couple. I don't know if anyone's got any items they wanted to raise, not necessarily for agreement, but just to raise so we can gather them for our next meeting. I've got a couple which have come to me over the last couple of days. Has anyone got any? Alison? You're on mute, Alison. No, your camera's off, Alison, and you're on mute.
I can't.
Can you unmute the mayor?
No, it's not working. I think, if I'm right, I think the mayor would like to propose that we write formally to Mr. Brian Payne to thank you for his.
What's not working?
It's all right. To thank him for the Faversham edition that he did for us.
Is that right, Alison? Give us a thumbs up if that's correct.
As a mind reader here.
Absolutely, I think it should. And I think it is a great shame that it hasn't got out into the public domain yet. You know, there's stacks of copies. It is such a good, I think the community are really going to enjoy looking at this and taking it all on board. Yeah, I think it's brilliant, and we should say thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could I add to that, John? I'm just corresponding with Louise actually while I'm in this meeting, trying to get her to agree that we can use the front of 12 Marketplace, because it seems to me we need to be out there again as soon as lockdown is over, distributing that edition. And also to remind you, John, we're very cognizant of this, but we've got another edition, the Faversham Eye, coming out. They're offering us 4 pages in the Christmas edition, which will give us an opportunity to carry some of the stuff from the second exhibition, and also to talk about the the outcome in terms of which site Swale has put forward for development.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, Harold. I think we've got lots of material, and absolutely agree that we could send a formal letter of thanks to Brian Payne. And again, just we've said it before, but we'll say it again, just so everyone understands it. That was offered to us for free. It didn't cost us a single penny, so we didn't spend any money on it. And also thank the volunteers who wrote it as well. Everyone give freely of their time.
Really good articles.
So thank them very much.
Very good.
Agreed. Just a couple of very quick things that came in sort of post the agenda. I think some of you may or may not know this because it was discussed a long time ago. In terms of promotion of a neighbourhood plan, we actually have a local Year 9 student, so one of our local schools, who very kindly volunteered to develop a logo for us. He has sent through a couple of sketch ideas, so they're not final logos, and I'll circulate those. If it's all possible, I would love to use something that's been created by a local young person. I think it's such a positive thing.
That sounds really great.
Absolutely.
I'll circulate it, and hopefully it'll inspire my own kids to do things like that. Just one thing for the next agenda I'd like us to talk about is around sports pitches and facilities. I think it's a hot topic at the moment. With another hat on, with a councillor hat on, I had a discussion this week with the development officer from Faversham Strike Force. They now have over 400 members, Faversham Strike Force, and they're running out of space. That's an immediate problem, but I think we really need to think about how we ensure that there's provision for hockey, athletics, cricket, rugby, football, any sport that requires a significant amount of space.
John, could I just add to that? I think one of the things we need to do is to create as many opportunities for the schools to work together going forward as possible. There haven't always been good relationships, particularly between the two secondary schools in this town. And I think if we could encourage the new school to have an athletics track, which would be usable by all three schools at the secondary level, that would be a physical way of causing collaboration between the schools, which could only be good. Probably have spin-offs in other ways too, as well as the obvious community benefits from having a hockey pitch, perhaps within that running track area.
Yeah. Brilliant. That would be brilliant.
Hannah?
Yeah, just as a kind of side note to that, really, it would be nice as well to kind of log and look at play spaces. So not like organised sporting activity places, but just free play spaces for children. I think would be an interesting thing to look at. Yeah,
I absolutely agree, Hannah. And I think the broad catch-all term is open spaces. Whether it's sports facilities, play spaces, local green spaces. We spent a fair amount of time thinking a lot about housing, quite rightly so, because it's been a thing which is been dominant part of the conversation. But it's really important we don't miss open spaces, and we should put that on the agenda for next. Okay. I think that unless anyone's got anything else they'd like to add, I think that concludes our meeting. I think between now and next time, the surveys will be out, and we'll have written to local landowners, and we should have some feedback on a call for sites as well, which will take the full count. We all done? Okay, thank you. Meeting. Oh, Jeff?
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you.